bill, and are there pending amendments?
Currently, there are no amendments pending.
Thank you. I'd ask unanimous consent to call up Amendment 521.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment numbered 521.
I'd ask unanimous consent that it be considered as read.
Without objection, the senator is recognized.
Mr. President, thank you for the recognition. About 3 months ago, one of the results of the last time we raised the debt limit was a report by the Government Accounting Office. 97 senators in this body voted to put that in the last debt limit extension. And what was that? That was a requirement for the Government Accounting Office over the next 3 years to list every program for us in every area so we knew what we were doing. And the purpose for that amendment, that happened to have been my amendment, was because when I went to the Congressional Research Service and I went to the Government Accounting Office, I said, I want to know every program in education, I want to know every program in defense, I want to know every program. And what they told me is it's impossible, we can't do it. We cannot give it to you. So we, and us collectively as colleagues, said, you will do this. And it's been a big job. They've done a fantastic job on it thus far, and I can't wait till we get the second third of that. But one of the results of that was the first report that the Government Accounting Office reported to us showed close to $200 billion worth of duplications. Now, that's not the CBO's number because they haven't scored it. That's my number in terms of looking at it. But and let's say I'm twice wrong. Let's say it's $100 billion. But the fact is what we found in just the first third of looking at the federal government, that we have multiple sets of duplicative programs that do exactly the same thing. They're just in a different agency, or they're across agencies. And in a moment, I'll talk about what those are. But the response to that report was the greatest response that GAO has ever had to any report that they've ever listed. The curious thing about that is 95% of what they reported on was a culmination of reports I'd asked for over the last 6 years put together, which means we had the information as members of Congress, we just wouldn't use it. In other words, it didn't get up to the level of being recognized that here's this and here's this. Only when we saw it together did all of a sudden we start seeing the magnitude of the problem of duplication. The purpose of this amendment, and it's very straightforward, is that on average the Senate considers in a session of Congress, in a Congress over 2 years, about 700 pieces of legislation. The Congressional Research Service now writes a report on each one of those and advises us about the legislation, what it does, what it doesn't do, what is out there. But the one thing that they don't do is they don't tell us where it duplicates things. And so the purpose of this amendment is that with each of those bills, that we would have the knowledge that the GAO has put out there, that the CRS will then go and get and say, here's what's out there now. And you need to consider that as you consider, why do we need another program to do something that we're already doing? What is wrong with the programs that we have now that are not accomplishing it? What it'll do is create transparency, not just for us, but for the American people. Because we add duplicative programs every year. And what it really raises the question of is, where's the oversight to see when we go to solve a problem? And the motivations here are wonderful. The motivations are to try to solve problems. But too often we lack the information, the knowledge with which to make a great decision. And the reason we lack that is because we fail on our duty to do oversight. So this information that would be provided becomes powerful. But more importantly, it creates tremendous transparency for the American public in saying, for example, if we're going to create another job training program, We have 47 of them right now funded by the federal government across 9 different government agencies. None of them are coordinated, and all but 3 overlap each other. Well, if we create another job training program, maybe we ought to know what all these others are and why we need to create another one rather than to make the ones that we have now work. I would actually question why we have 49 job training programs. But the problem is big. And let me spend a moment to put into the record just some highlights, and these are just the highlights. It represents less than a 10% of what the findings were of the last GAO report. We have 101 programs for surface transportation. They're run across 4 different agencies. We have 82 teacher quality improvement programs, 82 separate programs across 10 different, they're not in the Department of Education. There's 10 different agencies, 9 of which are outside the Department of Education that have teacher training programs. We have 88 economic programs run by 4 agencies costing $6.5 billion a year, 88 separate economic development programs. We have 80 programs to provide transportation for the disadvantaged across 8 different agencies. We spend $314 million on it. That's a good cause. That's something that we can do. But 80 different programs? We don't know what we're doing. So the purpose of this amendment, and it'll require a rules change to have it, is to ask CRS to show what are we doing and what's there already. Just like they analyze every other aspect of a bill before it comes to the floor. This won't be required on emergency legislation. It won't be required on committee reports. It won't be replied on filing of bills. It'll only be mandated if a bill comes to the floor for consideration by my colleagues. Let me finish up. We have 56 programs for financial literacy from 21 different agencies. Based on the talk we just heard of the last 2 senators, we are the last people that ought to be teaching anybody about financial literacy when we're running the kind of deficits and have the kind of debt we have and have the kind of duplication we have. Nobody who knows financial literacy would run 88 separate economic development programs and pay for the overhead of all of those through all these different agencies. Rather, they'd have 2 or 3, have a concentrated overhead and direct the emphasis of whatever that economic development program would be. We have 21 programs for homeless assistance. We spend $62 billion on 18 different food and nutrition assistance programs. We don't need 18, we need 2 or 3. And we need to have metrics on them to measure, are we effective in helping people with food and nutrition? We have bureaucracy after bureaucracy that's doing the same thing that another bureaucracy is doing in a different agency. And they don't know what the other agency's doing. And there's no coordination. And there's no measurement of the effectiveness of what we're doing. CRS claims that they don't have the manpower to do this. They have 350 analysts that do nothing but analyze legislation. This would require 1 analyst 1 time a year to look at the duplication on a bill coming to the floor. 1 analyst over a period of a year, 1 time, looking at it. CRS is a great resource to me. And I want them to have the resources that they need, because the only way we get out of the bigger problems that the senator from Nebraska was talking about is having the knowledge of what we're doing today. So my hope is that my colleagues will consider this not as a partisan amendment, not as but to give us information which gives us the power to make the best decisions for our country. And we need to be making better decisions. The other final thing this will do will help us not create a duplication again. It'll help us know what we need to do. And that's before we pass it into legislation. I'm so concerned as I look in bringing forward some options for my colleagues to look at in terms of solving our financial. Everywhere I go, as we dig deeper and deeper into this, we see the duplication, the inefficiency, the lack of direction, the lack of pointed purpose to get an end result in program after program after program of the federal government. Some of those truly aren't our role. But on those that are our role, that we are truly responsible for, constitutionally it is a responsibility of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government, we ought to know what we're doing. And we ought to know what's being done out there already. And we operate in a vacuum when we don't have this information. So it's my hope that my colleagues will support this in a way to give us information. There's nothing political about it. It is how do we make better decisions, and how do we do this in a way that will cause us not to create more duplication in the future, cause us to ask the smart questions about legislation. You see, those questions don't get asked unless somebody goes and does the digging now. And what my hope would be is we would all be empowered by having greater knowledge over what we're doing. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, and it'd be my hope that we could accomplish that. And I would yield the floor and notice the absence of a quorum. Oh, I withdraw that.
Mr. President.
The senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I want to congratulate the senator